I always was on site. I was pretty much running everything and I was coordinating all the subcontractors kind of in general. So I was like, I'm kind of doing this job. Why am I paying somebody an extra 20% to do this when I'm literally doing all of their work?
And she went from delivering pizzas to now a 9-figure real estate portfolio.
We break down how her journey from Lebanon happened, moving to the US, how she went from real estate residential to commercial, and a very, very interesting conversation about how she's future of real estate and how mitigating risk. You will really love it. I'm telling you, miss this opportunity. Take a break into this episode now before we get into Pamela's story from our sponsors.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Liz.
And this is Andressa.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Investor Show, where our passion, our mission, what runs through our veins is to empower women to live a financially free and balanced life. And we make that our focus, right, Andressa, and everything we're up to, and everything from real estate investing, business, self-care, the holistic view of who we are as women. We have Pamela Bardhi on our show today. Pamela, thank you so much for being here. So excited to jump into your story and trailblazing path that you've had, especially as a real estate developer in commercial real estate, no less, in that path that you've done. So thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with our community.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. And like I was telling you before the show, I'm like, women investors are like my absolute jam. So I'm so excited to be here today.
So we want to give as much value as we can for the new listeners that are literally, this is the first time they're jumping into our podcast, or the women and men that have been on our journey since, 5 years, in our podcast growth. So Pamela, what lesson has taken you the longest to learn?
Oh boy. So the lesson that took me the longest to learn and the one that I've been the most stubborn with, I'm not going to lie to you, is financial forecasting. Right. So in the DISC assessment, if you guys haven't taken it before, I'm a high D. So I'm very much a visionary, optimistic, all the things. And so I don't like the nitty gritty of numbers and forecasting and all these things. And that kind of hit me quite a bit when, a couple of deals that I screwed up on. So, I started in development at 21 years old, started flipping houses basically when I was 21. And I just remember, thank God I had a coach, but even with the coach at that point in time, there were still deals that I was able to somehow screw up because I got a little bit too optimistic in my numbers. So that's definitely the number one thing. Like, don't fall in love with the deal, fall in love with the numbers. And that happened to me a couple of times. So any female investors who are here, they feel my pain and they know what I'm talking about.
Oh, 100%. Let's talk about numbers, right? You just mentioned it. You went from selling pizzas to build a 9-figure real estate business. So ladies, pull your chair, get out of the treadmill or get in, depending on where you are, because you're going to have to take notes on this one. I want to mention what you just said about the forecast. Many times people talk about cash flow and they focus on the cash flow of the property, right? But when you're scaling and you are having multiple deals at the same time, the forecasting for your business, it is something that I don't think people talk about. And then unless you are in it, you can see all those properties literally sucking every single cent that you have from your business account because they're not producing, because they are in progress, right? And you're like, wait a minute. Scaling sounds wonderful, right? But from a business cash flow perspective, I think this is one of the biggest traps that nobody talks about when you're scaling, you really need to think about all the cycles of all the properties and how does that impact your business so you can raise money properly, considering all those things, and manage and not have a freaking heart attack or about to have it. For you, when it comes down to that, what have you put in place
Yes, absolutely. So contingencies and financial forecasting has definitely been something that was critical to me. So when I first started, I was like 21. And then my first few deals, I were great. They were amazing. Also, remember, I had two restaurants by the time I was 21 too. So I had my restaurants plus I had the flips going on. So I had
No, you had to, you were 21 years old in theory, but you were about 45 in real life. What's happening with you?
Well, I'll give you like a short synopsis of my story and then I'll kind of go into that. But basically, I came to the US when I was 5 years old from Albania. My parents won the visa lottery and basically came here with nothing. So I saw them basically grow everything from the ground up. When I was 10, my father bought a restaurant. I started working there when I was 10. And by the time I was 18, I was running the show at his restaurant. Then as soon as I finished college, I opened up two of my own restaurants and then was like working 14, 16-hour days, almost 7 days a week. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this. I'm like, how am I not fulfilled? And that's around the time that flips became this massive thing, like 2013, when all the shows started coming out and all of that. And, still a lot of leftover from 2009, 2008, 2009, crazy. So that's when I dove in. I hired a coach and basically dove into it. And so one of the things that my coach would always say to me would be like, Pam, you got to make sure, like, if you think you can, renovate it and sell it within 6 months, like, that's great, but just add some more time. And he's like, and just make sure you're mapping out the cash flow that your businesses need, and then mapping out the cash flow that each property you take on needs. And if it needs more time, make sure you add that time. Did I do that? No, I did not. My first few deals were absolutely fantastic. Making like 80, 100K profit. It was fantastic. Then that really, this one thing that has been huge has been, it's one thing to get to the top. It's another one to stay there. Right. So when you get those first few deals that really amp you up, you're like, I got this. I made X amount. You start to feel a little more confident in your upcoming deals. And you're like, yeah, whatever. I made this much in this. So it'll be totally fine. Yeah, I didn't do the proper contingencies, and some deals took longer than expected and took more cash flow than expected and didn't sell at the price point that I had thought because I'd gotten overly ambitious, right? So don't let those little like sparks of success in the beginning kind of hinder reality, right? And make you think like kind of like you let your guard down when it comes to financial forecasting, because that's when it'll really bite you, because any deal has the potential to lose your shirt if you let it, right? If the risk is high enough, right? So that was one of the things that as I was getting a little bit deeper into my career, getting a little bit more cocky and confident, right? So that's when I was like, it humbled me right away.
Yeah. Well, we all need to be humbled, right? That's so important. Well, we don't want to be humbled, but we need to be humbled, right? In so many ways. So for the contingencies, today's economy, let's talk about contingencies of how you're mitigating risk, because that's a big question mark for people, in terms of the, different real estate asset classes. Multifamily is still overpriced. Interest rates have gone up, whether they're going to come down, what's going to happen. Owners are still stuck in COVID times with their numbers, what they want out of properties, where they're just not, it hasn't caught up. So I'm curious to hear what your contingencies are today. How are you navigating that now with everything happening and making sure you're mitigating risk? And I think that's an important for the woman listening.
Absolutely. And I think it's more important now than ever because of the volatility of the market. So one of the things that I'm doing right now is getting super clear on what my focus is. And that's something that I was really contingent on from day one. Like, I was like, I'm working on 1 to 4 family properties in Boston in these specific areas, right? Because these are the areas that I know best. That's the best way you can mitigate risk, is to stick to what you know and what you can execute extraordinarily well, especially when the market is weird, like how it is right now, right? It's like, we didn't expect a pretty awesome spring market, but here we are, we got it, but then we don't know what's next, right? For the remainder of the summer. So really being clear on your strategy. And the next part of it is making sure there's multiple exit strategies out. I am seeing developers here in Boston losing their shirt because they only plan one way out. So any deal you're looking at right now, whether you're flipping or you're holding long-term, whatever it is, make sure that the numbers work both ways, right? Like if you had to sell this asset, could you still make money selling it at X, and play the most conservative number? And then the same thing if you're buying and holding it long term. So when it comes to contingencies, especially in the construction budgets, I put an extra 20%. You absolutely have to. The way that building inspectors are these days and the way materials are these days, you absolutely have to create that buffer for yourself. And guess what? If you stay within that or under that, fantastic. Keep it, right? It's for you. But keep that buffer zone in place, and then also add more time for you and making sure you have these multiple exit strategies kind of in and out. That would be the best way, especially in this market. And also maybe add a little bit of creative financing, right? So if there's a way to craft that, right, within your exit strategy, is there a way to creatively do this out? Because sometimes people are like, oh, I have to sell or I have to hold long term. Well, maybe there's a way for you to creatively work that deal. So something else to consider in your exit strategy. But those two things, staying hyper-focused on your strategy, what you know best and what you can execute well. And then this other part, which is super, 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 super key.
What I want to just bring to awareness, right? Because for the women that are listening to you right now and totally understand and agree about focusing on what you know, because the market is so variable and volatile at the moment. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. We're looking at a property right now that is literally 7 minutes from my house. So even on that portion, I want to be as close as I can because I can control those variables. But one thing that I want to point it out to the women that are listening, right? You just heard Pamela talking about being creative, thinking about creative financing and different assets. One thing I don't want you guys to do is like, wow, now I need to learn all of that myself, and that's going to take time. I really need you guys to think about leaning into the community. Our Facebook group has a lot of women that has already done it. So leverage the experience, listen to different types of podcasts of women that has done this already. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Right. And then once you get to a point where you're like, okay, I'm ready to present. Hey, everybody, I am thinking about presenting this offer. Those are the numbers. What am I missing here? Right. And then when you get stuck and then you go to the community, it's different than when you do your homework and then you go to the community to ask for support. Then like, hey, can somebody just teach me how to do X, Y, and Z? Right. So do the work. But you said something, Pamela, that I have to read this here. You said this magic word, construction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is one of my love languages. And you became the youngest female general contractor to earn an unrestricted construction supervisor license in Massachusetts. That's so different. That's such a difficult word for all the immigrants to read. Massachusetts. And you says the license broke barriers for me as an underdog in this industry. I am in two male-dominated fields, real estate development and commercial real estate. It has always been my goal to break through stereotypes and shatter glass ceilings. I love that so much. But can we talk about construction? Can we dig into a little bit about why did you choose that? Was it because you lost trust in contractors? You're like, you know what? I'm just going to take it over. Or you had that passion? Because there's a lot of women out there on our community that are thinking the same way to really get specialized on the construction piece because they had enough. So what was your thought process when you made that decision, first of all?
Yes. So my thought process when I made that decision was, I always was on site all the time, and I was pretty much running everything, and I was coordinating all the subcontractors kind of in general. So I was like, I'm kind of doing this job. Why am I paying somebody an extra 20% to do this when I'm literally doing all of their work? And also I saw so many inefficiencies in the game. And what's really interesting about this, because I always talk to my ladies and I'm like, hey, listen, why is it that, no offense to men, right? Why is it that they can't balance a billion things at once? And one of my good friends, Brinley, was like, Pamela, it goes back to like our days way back in the day, cavemen days, where men are hunters, women are gatherers. So we're always looking at different things. We're balancing so many different relationships, and we can keep so many things, so many balls in our court. And I'm like, that's so fascinating. And that's what a GC does. If you think about it, right? You're there, you're fostering relationships and you're coordinating a bunch of different things. And you're almost like the conductor of the entire project, right? So when you see that it hasn't been executed well on your projects previous to, I was like, I'm just going to get my CSL and do this thing myself. I'm running it anyways, right? So let me just go and get that. And I'll tell you, it took me 4 times I took that test. 5th time, it was a snowstorm. It was so early. I drove like 2 hours out and I was like, oh my God, please, I hope I pass this CSL today. That I did. And it was remarkable. So it's been a really cool license to have. And it's been a really cool experience to kind of be that on the job sites, especially because, especially being a young female, they kind of think that they can walk all over you. But I've learned that if you treat people like family, you give them the respect and you showcase your knowledge to them, it's game over. They treat you just like one of their own. So that's the key is those relationships. But if you ever want to get condescending or rude or mean, like anybody else, somebody's going to snap at you. So that's really the key. And if you pay them on time and everything's on schedule and you're constantly communicating, then you're in good shape. If not, might be a little rough.
What would you tell women who are considering that as a step, meaning that they want to become the general contractor? What would you say to them as some words of wisdom or a litmus test to say, do you really want to do this? And this is what it looks like. Because there are a lot of women in our community who've expressed that and they're just not sure. Yeah.
So I think you've got to have a few projects under your belt and make sure you have really good relationships with subcontractors in order to move ahead and do that. See, I was already boots on the ground, taking over projects and running them myself. So it's very easy for me to say, okay, hey, next project that's coming on, we're doing X, Y, Z, here are the plans, get it done. So make sure you have a few projects under your belt and you know exactly what it feels like because it is a lot of pressure, right? So when I got to the point that I was handling and I was doing more projects at a time, I had to bring in a GC just for time purposes, right? So it depends on how many projects are you actually working on right now. Have you done them before? Because it's a rude awakening if you haven't and you step into the game. I would advise like shadowing a GC for a while before you dive in or really get hands-on on a project before you go in. But I mean, honestly, once you do that once or twice or 3 times or whatever, you get your feet wet and it's much more comfortable to step into the game at that point because it's you're in your element. You have the relationships built, you know what the process looks like and all of that, because construction can really take you for a bit of a ride. And it really also depends on the level of construction that you're doing, right? So if you're doing 1 to 4 family flips, you're more than likely to do this on your own. If you're working on massive scale developments,
whole different game.
That's what they have a whole different ballgame. So it really, there's a few variables that matter there.
And I like what you're saying that you have that as a tool, right? As a possibility. And if you get other projects, we are all looking to build wealth here. We're not looking to get a job, right? So having that, you have the choice and not the need. 2 different things, right? You have the choice. If I want to run, I run. And if I don't, I hire somebody. And still, I get the knowledge to have high-level conversation with that person, get the respect, and then we move it quicker. I want to transition to the commercial properties. How did you make the decision? Was it conscious or it just happened to go from residential to commercial? And I don't know if it was linear to you or parallel to everything that you have going on, because a lot of the women that we have been talking inside our community are thinking about going higher. And when we talk to them, they say, oh, and then they say a smaller number. And then we have a more deeper conversation. It's like the same energy that you apply here, you apply with 10 or 15 more doors, and actually will be better because then you can have cash flow enough to pay somebody to manage the property. So we are having all those conversations. Before we get there, share with the ladies what type of commercial are we talking that you are investing.
When it comes to commercial, it's really anything that's over 4 units, residential, or mixed use properties, which means like commercial on the first floor, residential above. So you're kind of mixing the risk levels, if you will. So that's, what I realized was the same work that you're going to do on a 10 unit building is going to be the same work that you're going to do on a single family, same time spent. And it's brutal when you think about it, because you're like, this is the same framework, this is the same thing, but I'm making so far less here, but this is, again, with your journey in time, how you learn, right? And so that was the transition that I decided to make, because I proved my model where I was at the 1 to 4 units. I stabilized myself, built my track record, because also lenders pay attention to things like this, right? Private lenders, investors, people that are investing in you, all of that. They're not just going to go out there and be like, here you go out and buy commercial real estate when you have zero experience, right? And we're entering a time in the United States of America's economic disaster pretty soon that we have $3 trillion worth of commercial real estate assets coming due in the next 18 months. And commercial has been transitioning very fast because of the fact that it's been so behind on innovation. Residential has been easier to kind of implement different things into. Commercial has not, right? Like, for example, people are like, malls are dying. Yes and no, right? So like the retail footprint is getting smaller, but the warehouse footprint is getting bigger. So are you staying ahead of those trends when it comes to the consumer, right? And now what's happening is COVID created, what it created, where everyone's working from home and all of that stuff. So now you got these office buildings in, especially here in Boston, that are sitting half empty, half vacant, and that's affecting values. And so how is that all going to play out? So, commercial is an excellent field. It's just, there's a lot more risk, a lot more money involved, and you just have to learn to mitigate that really, really well. Like for me, I went for the smaller commercial stuff and then kind of transitioned a little bit bigger when it came to the investment portfolio. And now I'm actually diving into more shipping home container developments and tiny homes and that kind of thing in the future, which is also classified as commercial. But it just really depends. You have to mitigate that risk level big time. So it depends what you're looking at, right? You got to almost taste test it a little bit and kind of step into it slowly, because you could lose a lot.
I think that because of COVID, right, we had a shift, not just the real estate market, we can all see it, right? And there was a shift of behavior and lifestyle that, in my opinion, is dictating where real estate will go. And nobody could freaking predict that from 10 years ago. That was not even possible, right? So when we're talking about lifestyle, when we're traveling, what are we looking to do? Go to Airbnbs or having an experience, right? So the cookie cutter projects won't cut anymore, or I should say, you won't yield the full potential that it could if you added a little pinch of experience and personality into it. You're talking about tiny homes. People realized, I believe, that things don't bring them happiness, or they don't get fulfilled with it. And they don't need all this stuff. They don't need all of it. So you either shove it to a storage unit and buy a tiny house, or, right, the containers, the glamping, all of those. Do you see as the new way of people being? Because they are our clients, right? They are our consumers. Is there where you see the opportunity lays for real estate?
Absolutely. That is absolutely the future. And it's actually one of the reasons why I kind of scaled back on development and decided, hey, I want to build with intention. And I really want to build something that's going to not just serve somebody, serve a certain percentage of the population, right? What's going to take this to a whole new level, and what's going to integrate all of these experiences like you were talking about. And I'm looking at the inefficiencies of construction, because I've run job sites and I've seen how much like physical labor it takes. One project could take you 6 to 9 months or even a year to renovate. If you're building new construction, you might be in 12 to 18 months, right? So and that's why I was mentioning earlier, a single family could take you just as much time as a 10 unit or beyond, right? Because the same timetable. And so looking at the inefficiencies of construction and looking at things like shipping home containers that could provide long-term housing solutions. Imagine you're running utilities and then you plug in these shipping containers, and then all of a sudden you can execute hundreds of sites within 6 to 9 months. Caveat there's zoning, of course, but things like this is like, this is where the future's going.
I'm curious, Pamela, with that piece of it, or that transition, how did you mitigate risk? And I think that's the question that so many investors are figuring, right? They're shifting, they're using what they know. Back to your original point, right? What can I do today that I mitigate risk? I kind of go all in on what I know and what I can do, but that can be applied to a little bit of of a different asset class, if you will, that quite honestly aligns better with the current economy and where we're headed. And that's the game we're in right now. And that's really what people need to focus their energy on. But I'm curious, how did you, basis of the first thing we talked about forecasting and not, because you said you're a high D, which means you're high dominance, right? So you're going to go for those new things. And I think so many of us do. So I'm curious, how did you mitigate your own risk? Are you doing these shipping container tiny homes in your kind of local economy? Is it in a different economy? I'm just curious to get inside your head. Now, as a more seasoned person, how are you navigating that?
It's a new thing. So it's almost like I'm starting from scratch, right? Because this is a new type of concept and development. It has been done across the country. Mine's a little bit different. So I'm working on a beta right now. And I live in Massachusetts, but I want to do this in Vermont because the zoning is much less stricter. And I know that once I have a beta, that from there, I can take that and replicate it kind of all across the US, right? But when it comes to these shipping containers, the way that I'm financially modeling them is, okay, well, what's a model that has worked in the past? And you look at mobile home parks and, owner still retains the land value, right? You still own the land always, but then the person gets to keep that container. It's their home, right? So, there are some lending restrictions and things with that, but I'm looking at it and I'm saying, well, for investors, this is monthly recurring cash flow coming in. This is very easily built once the permits are in process pretty much and approved, because I can have them dropped, done, connected to utilities and all of that. And you can pretty much model it out. Okay, well, if we rent these units, it'll rent for X amount. And then we get the monthly cash flow of X as well. Because you can do it two ways. You could either sell the containers and then the individual family or whoever is living inside there owns it, or you can just rent it out to them. So there's two different models. And I'm kind of doing a hybrid of both to test out both, because they're still not, although it's been approved in the code books that shipping home containers, tiny homes, they have their own version of code, which is amazing. And this has been done within like the last year or two. So one of my biggest goals is to be a pioneer in that space, because not only will it serve on these major developments, but it's also going to serve for homeowners for additional dwelling units on their properties, right? So there's two functions to this. And that's where I see the maximum value is in these two ways. But the way that I was looking at this one, how do I create the risk level for my investors at the lowest level, is model it after a mobile home park and work it from there. Because mobile home parks, sometimes the mobile home owners own the units and rent them out. And then a lot of them are also sold as well. So that's the way that I looked at it, because I said, this is a proven model that people have seen before, and let's not recreate the wheel, but do it in such a way where it's bringing in the 21st century and the new kind of consumer idea, right? And kind of creating that kind of flow, but then also mitigating risk at the same time, right? With a model that's already been proven, kind of like reworking it, just tweaking it a little bit.
And that's really how you hedge against making mistakes in this economy. And I think that's pretty key. It's actually necessary, and I think that's neat. And I love that you're saying it's more of a beta. And I think more women really need to get their heads around just like beta testing, fill in the blank, versus like, I need to know everything. I need to be an expert in this. And I love that approach where you're going to be like, okay, we're going to beta this and I'm going to, and how do I mitigate the least amount of risk for my investors and for myself? Because if you are, putting money into new things, which we are doing the same, you have to mitigate it for them. So I love that. Pamela, this has been great. I want to follow you along the tiny home journey. That's really neat. Where can the ladies listening learn more about you and follow you along?
Absolutely. So I'm on social media, Pamela_Bardhi on Instagram. You can find me on LinkedIn and all the things. And then also my website, PamelaBardhi.com. Happy to connect. Any questions? Like, I am here. Just want to see you elevate. That's the number one thing.
And the Real Estate Underdog podcast, ladies, please tune in. We're going to add all of this information on our show notes, so you can just go there and get it. Now we're going to transition to our fabulous 3 questions. And the first one, Pamela, is, What's the most transformational book you ever read?
Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. That was a huge mindset shift. I know that's like the most basic answer for all you guys out there. You're like, of course it's that one. Yes, it's that one for me. But it's just such an iconic book and a step by step, and like really, it just propelled me to the whole next level when I had heard that book. So definitely that.
Second question is, what's the most powerful routine that you do to create a financially free and balanced life?
Yes, writing it down. I'm super old school with the notepads, right? So as wonderful as all this AI and all these technology is on your phones and all the things, I'm still like, I need pen to paper and I need to map it out like monthly, weekly, daily, and like really breaking that down and creating a whole visualization process behind that, and kind of getting it down on paper has been huge for me in terms of productivity and also manifestation.
I like that. Now it's a topic for the next podcast, productivity plus manifestation. Now you got me curious. Last question. Which woman, famous or not, has inspired you the most?
So there is a local builder, her name's Cindy Stumpo. So she actually was my role model when I stepped into the game here in Boston. So she had her own HGTV show called Tough as Nails, and she's in the next town over from me. So she builds like 3 million and up types of mansions, and she's been doing this since the 80s. Like she had 2 kids, like young, and she's still on these job sites crushing it. And I remember when I first looked in development, I was looking for a model, right? Because the first thing you do when you're trying to start something new and mitigate risk, right, is look at a model of something else that has worked. And it kind of almost makes you feel better when you start, or it inspires you to start, because it's like, hey, if this person or if this worked for this person, then why wouldn't it work for me? Cindy was absolutely one of those people. And I remember running into her office one day, and this was like when I was first starting in real estate development. And I was like, Cindy, I know you don't know me, but you inspire me big time as a woman. Like, you've been doing this since the 80s. Like, and the stuff you build, it's not like it's like limestone, like very like gorgeous, like detailed, amazing properties. And what she's built over the years was so inspiring to me. And I remember she said to me, she gave me a huge hug, even though she had no idea who I was. And I could have been a raging psychopath for all she knew. Right? I just showed up at her office, and she just gave me a huge hug. And she's like, honey, anything you need, like, I'm here. Here's my cell, just call me anytime. And that, like, to have that, I never bothered her, of course, but to have that, like, oh my God, somebody believes in me at this level, and like, look at what she's created. And, she's willing to be there for me. Like, that's huge. So that's the special thing about women, right? Is like, we rise, we help each other rise, which I think is the most beautiful thing ever. So
I love that. Thank you so much, Pamela, for being on our show. Thank you for sharing your ideas, wisdom, and appreciate all that you're doing. Excited to see where you go.
Thank you so much for having me, ladies. This is amazing.
Thank you.